Welcome to Inclusive Cyber, your front row seat to understand how a diverse mix of voices is not just necessary, but essential to protect our most sensitive computer networks and personal data. I'm your host, Danny Magallanes, and through my podcast, we shine the spotlight on the heroes and trailblazers from every corner of society who are redefining the diversity, equity, and inclusion frontier. Every episode is a step towards a cyber community that's as varied as it is united, where everyone has the keys to unlock their potential and the power to protect our digital world. Join us on this journey where every listen, every share, every dialogue inches us closer to this new reality. This week, I talked with Ivette Bayo, who I met at Raices CyberCon late last year. Much of our discussion is super high level, but dip into great examples to make sure it resonates with all of you. We had a very organic and cerebral conversation, and I loved every minute of it. We talk about how to get more diverse voices into cyber, but she frames it in a unique way that I would argue the majority don't think this way. Again, think macro versus micro perspective. We are living in a rough cybersecurity job market, but she remains hopeful, and it boils down to taking care of yourself and loving one another. Simple but powerful advice that we all need to start listening to. I would love your feedback on this episode and others. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Enjoy the episode. Vet, welcome to Inclusive Cyber. I'm super excited to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I know we met last year at Raices CyberCon, the first cybersecurity for Latinx community members here in the US. Just an incredible time meeting very innovative and creative folks and people that want to make a difference. So I know we've been talking past couple of months, and every time we speak to each other, I just get a lot of new ideas formulated in my head. So I think we're able to kind of feed off each other's curiosity. So again, looking forward to this conversation. But for the audience, can you just give us a quick background?
My name is Ivette Bayo. Thank you so much for having me here. I am born in Miami to parents that had come from Cuba to the United States. In the early 70s, I was born mid-70s. I was a middle school math teacher before I decided to pursue a PhD. I did 7 years in research and development and was really focused on human-computer interaction, particularly as it relates to women and how they choose to bring technologies into the home. And I had done work with a local nonprofit organization here in Seattle called Casa Latina. We did a very collaborative project that had different library systems, the university as well as the nonprofit collaborating to do development workshops centered around the women, for the women, by the women, and for their children. And then in 2018, through a combination of factors, personal, health, and professional, choosing to transition into cybersecurity, I separated from the university. Again, it was a hot topic. There were lots of things that were coming together. I needed to really prioritize my family and take care of myself so that I could prioritize my 2 kids, a young one and a not so young one. That helps me think about my relationship with technology as I've grown up with it, but also I've seen them and their relationships with technology. I think that each person has their own path, and learning is just one piece of it.
I appreciate your background, and I know you have an education background. So I guess one of the first questions I really want to focus on our discussion is how do we, when it comes to cybersecurity, there's a lot of gaps. Some would argue that we are failing miserably because of all these data breaches. From an educational perspective, what gaps do you see and how do we address those gaps?
This is coming from an informed place. I think the biggest gap is that the human rate of change is different than the technological rate of change. We learn slower than machines. Developmentally, the human from birth to 5 years old is getting everything that we need to boot up. Then the age of adolescence has a lot of pruning that happens in the brain. It is another large growth spurt in development. Um, Still, the part of inhibition is not there. There's renegotiations with identity, and there's a lot of stuff happening, right? Somebody says something to you, and it's like the most important thing in the world, right? It's like the world is going to end because Danny told me that he wanted to talk to me today. And if I like Danny or if I don't like Danny, either way, there are feelings associated with that information, right? And then there are transitions that we have as humans in our life, right? I mean, it's really the basics of part of the human condition. The idea is that we're slow compared to if I create a large language model and feed it all the information that I want it to know and then let it go. It's going to be able to learn quicker because it doesn't have to go through that human maturation development phase. And so I think the part that I would like to see is how can we create community support for that mentoring, right? It really, if we think it's important, if we say that cybersecurity is important, if information security is important, then we have to be able to have the people that have the knowledge, skills, and abilities be able to afford to reinvest and share their knowledge and expertise with the next generation. And I think that I say that with a lot of humility and a lot of intentionality. A young person may know a lot more on a certain domain of knowledge or a certain type of technology. However, we cannot make that assumption because gender does not dictate what your technological capabilities are, neither does your age, right? Technology is a disruptor of that kind of limitation. But if we're not able to see that, then it's a challenge, right? Because we will continue to have gaps. One of the gaps that I see current professionals now, let's say you are in the College of Social Work or the College of Education, there should be a topic on privacy, confidentiality, integrity, technology that is covered so that they can protect themselves as they are providing service. Same thing to educators, same thing to, school administrators and principals. So I think regardless of where you are, if you're not paying attention to the types of questions that people are asking about technology, to the types of both structural and procedural formulations that are happening right now around AI and technology, I think that we'll be at a deficit because by the time that we wake up and ask the question, it'll be too late,
I,
you know?
I definitely like where you're going with this. You're kind of taking the typical CIA triad within cybersecurity and expanding it to society and education. So I love that because I think you're right. I'm going through a certification and it says, who's responsible for security? And they say, everyone. But that is in a closed box of corporate America, right? But I think we all need to expand that to society.
Well, we need to. I mean, so let's think of e-commerce or retail. I've had the opportunity to work frontline retail during the pandemic. And I say it's an opportunity, but it was also a huge responsibility because there was a lot of stuff happening, right? What I observed was there's a lot of older people that work in retail. There's a lot of young people that work in retail. There's a lot of people of color that work in retail. There's a lot of military spouses that work in retail. Retail is an economic engine in many, many different ways. It isn't a bad thing to say retail, but I think that if we start educating everyone about information security, we have an opportunity and an obligation to be role model for public trust. Serving the public is a public trust type of endeavor. And so I think that thinking about how this is everyone's job and And what can we do? How can we make sure that the work that is happening at NICE, the National Institute of Cybersecurity Education, that those conversations about blending K-12 education and industry and academic partners and researchers, that can get into that vernacular or the language of commonplace. Last year, the conference was in Seattle, and I went to one of like the pre-workshops, and one of the panelists, and I'm forgetting who it was, but one of the panelists said, "We are all cyber defenders." And that's the way we talk about it in the K-12 area. And I'm like, oh, that's perfect. But what about the fact that the CDC has reported that from 2000 to 2020, our human body is changing, right? There's an increase in diagnoses for people with autism. I'm just giving one characteristic so that we can talk about it, right? So there's been an increase from 1 in 150 to 1 in 50. And again, don't quote me on the actual number, but it's about that. You could go to the cdc.gov to get the actual statistic. But it's a very significant change in a 20-year period. That little bit of information should be enough to tell us, hey, we need to think about things a little bit differently. Because then that means that the time, energy, resources, skills, abilities, capabilities, and interest of what's coming in the next generation might be different than the current one. And even any, like you pick any generation, right? We're not a monolith. And so we have to remember that these are actively moving pieces, like a whole bunch of ants on the planet, right? No one person is more important than the other one, but our jobs are to take care of this planet, to take care of each other, and to create spaces so that all of us can live and learn and cooperate and live in that global society.
I want to circle back to what you initially said about companies wanting to protect our data. And I'm going to use a cheesy line from the 90s show that I really love, The X-Files. I want to believe, and even going back to studying that I'm doing for this certification, it talks about protecting people's data, being baked into the governance of that organization. So it's accountability is going super high in organizations. But as we've seen recently with massive layoffs, IT, marketing, and everything in between to include cybersecurity. So for me, actions speak louder than words. It's almost like organizations are saying, yeah, we believe in protecting people's data, but at the end of the day, our actions speak otherwise because we're letting go of these cybersecurity professionals. And plus, we're not even given the time of day for new professionals coming up into the ranks, whether they're seasoned professionals from another career or straight out of college. So then now that creates a massive burden on the people that are in cybersecurity, because if their partner in crime to the left and right of them just got laid off, that work still needs to be done. So Bob is left not only doing his own work, but now he's got to do triple the amount of work because security is still kind of a process. And I guess the question that I'm trying to get to, there is the need, but it seems that the culture, whether within companies or even the culture within cybersecurity itself, is not being inclusive to bring in the diverse voices. What has been your experience?
I don't want to generalize because the people that make decisions about finances, I'm sure, have lots of information at their disposal that I'm not privy to. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back, and I will say that I do agree with you. If you're not willing to fund it and put your money where your mouth is, then that sends a message. In the ecosystem of employment, I'm sure that economists could explain to us, so maybe we should find one, to see how the macro ecosystem of economics and that evolution happens and changes across the industries as they analyze that unemployment rate.
Mhm.
But definitely what I've seen firsthand and what I've experienced from counterparts is it resonates with what you're saying. They want a unicorn. They're not willing to engage because there's processes, procedures, and protocols because HR has to have a process and procedure so that if I apply for a job and you don't pick me, that I cannot turn around and say discrimination. So I think that there's two sides of this. What comes to mind is actually a proposal that I submitted in 2023 for NICE that did not get accepted
Mhm.
because it was looking at the intersections of cybersecurity and trauma. It's directly because of what you're saying. Cybersecurity is already a high stress job. It's a 24/7. There's constantly alarms and can't talk about it, don't talk about it. There's a lot of stuff that
Right.
either you're privy to and you know that you don't know, or you're not privy to and you don't even know that you don't know that all this stuff is happening around. That plus the people that are getting laid off, and then what happens to that human body when now you personally or someone in your circle is encountering fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That creates a really not safe environment for making good decisions. Yet, that is true of a lot of professions, right? But I don't know. I think that there's definitely something that we can do. And I don't know what it is, but I think that if we don't ask these questions, we're never going to get to it.
Right. I think you already might have said the answer. It's all about building that trust, right? It's building that community and helping each other out and
Mhm.
asking those questions.
Yes, but hold on, because there's more. The whole concept of social engineering and the bad actors, how do we engineer trust in a zero trust environment? There is so much division. There is so much amplified with misinformation that's happening because of people intentionally putting things that are likely to get an emotional response or a reaction instead of something that is more paused, right? And because we can, sometimes we do, it's important to think about how do I know that you are who you say you are and that you're not some hallucination?
Right.
I know that the researchers and the AI folks, they're talking about, well, sometimes, some of the dangers around AI is that you could inject data into a LLM and poison that lake or, poison that data. And then what you're going to get out is not going to be good.
I love how we're just looking at very high level topics. And I know this probably
Well,
wasn't,
and then going down a little bit and then giving an example,
yes.
right?
And I know that's so I love this organic conversation because we were definitely going off a little bit off script. But
Mhm.
one thing you mentioned AI. So I want to quickly kind of transition to that and the privacy, right? Privacy and AI. But before that, I don't know if you just recently heard there was a Hong Kong company that was victim in to your point about social engineering.
Mhm.
In this case, the threat actors were able to steal $25 million from this particular company, and it was a form of social engineering and AI via deepfakes.
Mm.
So let's say they targeted me. I got a Zoom call with my bosses, and it said, Danny, I need you to transfer 25 million to this account right now. We're in a high stakes meeting. Yes, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And send that. But the numerous people that were on that Zoom call were all
Mhm.
fake. With that being said, and what you said about injecting large language models with corrupt data, with biased data, what does privacy and ethical use of AI look like in the future?
I can't get into the AI part because I'm stuck in a particular part of my understanding model that I'll just share. Just by being alive, we consume data and we generate data. If you have a cell phone, you're leaving tracks of where you've been. Even though I've had conversations with scholars on privacy and privacy people on privacy, I think that in some ways we need to change the way that we talk about it. That illusion of privacy is more what we have instead of actual privacy. So I just want to put that there, because then everything else that we talk about for AI, it depends. AI is a disruptor that is disrupting, as we speak, the learning process. It's helping people. I had a conversation with a systems engineer when the last year, around the time that all the big headlines and AI started popping up, and they said it's a large language model. It's not AI. It's not sentient. It was the distinction that they were making. That part is all fine and good. What I do think the power of AI is allowing somebody that maybe isn't a coder, or that doesn't speak C, that doesn't speak one of those programming languages, to be able to query in a way that is more user friendly. And so I think that in some ways there is good to come of it, because we're going to get better at asking questions. But if we get better at asking questions and we don't get better at thinking, all right, what does this tell me? And I think that it starts with the most mundane. I think that this starts from the home. It starts the families talking to their kids and talking about it when they go to the grocery store, talking about it when they go here. Don't take somebody's picture without their consent. Ask before you take. Let's learn about the metadata and the geolocation option. If you want to have privacy before you upload, turn that part off, right?
I think what you're describing, I definitely agree.
Yeah.
I guess my simple question, unlike the other one, how do we get people to start working? How do we get companies to start opening the door, allowing these workers to come in and start bringing in their unique perspectives, their creativity to solve our challenges now? I think that's the biggest hurdle. We are only focused on what's in front of us, and it seems like we don't have that strategic mindset to say, we need to be ahead of this. You mentioned that the psychological effect of working in cybersecurity, it's hitting a lot of people where they have potentially mental breakdowns. So when do we get to a state where there's equilibrium, because there is more defenders than adversaries?
Okay. You bring up some very good questions, and I'm going to try to unpack them one by one. First one, I think I appreciate you talking about breakdown. In 2018, I had to step away because I was burned out, and I spent 6 months not sleeping, thinking that I was sleeping. I will tell you that your relationship with your brain changes after that. And I really had to get the guidance of medical professionals to understand what was happening so that I could learn to trust myself again and reestablish a regular sleep rhythm, because the stress made it so that I didn't have that. So I think we need to be able to talk about mental health without the stigma. And it's kind of ironic, because I had even given a talk at a public library around the stigma around mental health and ways to be intentional about how much technology we let into our lives. Because if every time that you check an email and now causes you to change focus, then you're not being present with the things that are important. I think it is very important that as humans, as communities, as family members, as parents, as employees, as business owners, I think that it's important that we remember that what is most important has to remain most important, and that our actions should reflect that. That's how we get that integrity piece. And I think that that's important. Tell me the second part of the question so I know where I'm going, because I think I might have lost the train.
How do we address the cybersecurity concerns right now? What you initially mentioned is generational, which will be awesome for our future generation. We're going to be
Well,
more secure.
I think that it has to be a two-prong approach. We have to start with the generation that we have access to now. So like K-12's got to be on the hook, higher education and all the programs that are there. Everybody, I mean, if it were for me, everybody should take philosophy and ethics and humanities and computer science, as well as art and music. I think that different people learn different ways, and we need to celebrate that because all these skills are transferable. And I think that is the biggest lesson. We need holistic cyber defenders, not just somebody that can press keys on a keyboard and program. And not that I'm saying that our engineers are like that at all, right? Because that has not been my experience. But I think that we have to take that into consideration as we think of what career pathways might people find. Some people are going to go through higher ed. Some people are going to go through certification. Some people are going to know somebody, and some people are trying to figure it out. And I think being able to support the dreaming of what your life can be like, that envisioning a goal, setting a mark and going after it, and doing so independently or with support of a community, those are the things that we need partnerships for, and that we're going to need some financial support to do, similar to the concept of community of practice. Generally, communities of practice are like grassroots types of orgs, but imagine if the ways that organizations are collaborating with professional associations, with their schools, with community folks, with the local retailers. I think that we need to think about the whole ecosystem.
Looking at it from that strategic macro perspective is key. The only way we're going to address this is having that strategy in place. And that ecosystem, like you mentioned, where you have educators, you have organization, you have grassroots efforts, everybody contributing and adding value. And that is going to trickle throughout society. But I think what you're saying definitely resonates with me, because now you need empathetic leadership that is not focused on internal problems only. And not to say that they're not right in doing that, but thinking bigger than themselves. To my point, it's business needs and humanity needs. I met somebody last year that was unemployed for I think 8 months, and I was working hard to find him something internally within my employer, and then even externally through my network. And they just recently had a baby. Hearing that just changes the whole dynamics.
You bring up a beautiful point. And that point, the way I see it is this. The job scope of somebody that's hiring is putting a body in that role so they can get onboarded and begin to fill that need. Your role as a mentor, as a community leader, as an information leader, as a cyber leader, says, here's someone that's got these skills. I want to help connect them. I think we need more of that. But imagine if we can do that and support that work. These are the ways that we help bring down barriers for navigating this field. I was underemployed for 5 years. And then when the pandemic hit, I went to work because there did not seem like there was an option. I felt like I can work, I will work, and I just needed to stay close to home. So I went to retail.
My follow-up question in regards to bringing more inclusivity, more diversity into cybersecurity. What are your thoughts? What have you experienced in that? And any ideas to, open up the aperture for that?
Thoughts? Many. Experiences vary. I have been fortunate to have had lots of people help me get to where I am, present company included, Raices, but also in my local community, alums from my university, people that while we were at the university actually studied cybersecurity, unlike me who decided to study that afterwards. As I was thinking about what next, my wish would be that we could find a way to fund, even if it's minor support, but some type of stipend, both for the people that are searching and really actively grinding to get this knowledge in so that they could be helpful and in that defense role, regardless of which path they take. But also for the people that are doing that heavy lifting, because teaching and learning, and in particular, working with the cyber community, you have to navigate and tread with caution and care. And yet, in order to build trust, you have to be trustworthy. You have to speak the lingo. You have to know your stuff. You have to know the concepts inside and out. And if not, be willing to ask, because if you don't know and you're the one responsible for knowing, guess what? You have a catastrophe. I spent time at FedEx for a year, and it was a great time that I had with the company. I really, really enjoyed the work that they do, the way that they support their folks, and the ways that they communicate the message that information security is everybody's responsibility. And I think that's why it is important that it's everybody's business and that companies invest in cyber education training, right? And that make it real and accessible and relevant to the community of people that actually work there. Because you can't protect something if you don't know what it is.
I love the concept of building out the CIA triad outside of organization X, Y, and Z. And that education piece, I know that is kind of your foundation. I'm assuming your passion. And I think you're right. It's building that awareness, understanding of how these threats, whether it's deep fakes or ransomware or nation states, and even minority small businesses that don't have the resources, that are looking, they could be living month to month selling their products and services, and they're not even aware of cybersecurity. Going back to what I said about trickling, not necessarily the 80s trickle down, but more maybe permeating sideways and just educating everyone, getting leaders like you to say, hey, let's sit down with minority owned businesses and say, where are you backing up your data? The simple things, right? Or password multi-factor authentication. I would argue that our phone numbers are more important now than our social security numbers, because everything is attached to that multi-factor authentication to that phone.
I hadn't even thought about that.
SIM swapping, right? Even though this isn't a SIM a card here, it's a memory card, that is very prevalent.
The types of technologies that we use are directly related to what we've been exposed to, right? So maybe somebody's watching this video and they're like, I have no idea what he just showed. The other day, a doctoral candidate from UW, I went to a hackathon and they take out a thing and I was like, what's that? It's a flipper. And I was like, oh man, I've never seen one in real life. So that he's like showing me the gadget. But again, if you don't know what it is, you wouldn't even know the power that a device like that has, right? It doesn't mean that that person's using it for bad reasons. They're using it as a way to store information that is relevant to them. We just know that it's a cute tinker toy that has multiple capabilities, right?
Depending on the motivation of the user.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
But Ivette, I know our conversation has been very cerebral, very kind of macro
So let's
talking.
go down.
No, this has been good. What are some of the key things that you want the listeners to take away from our conversation?
I would like the listeners to take away the fact that in order for us to be able to protect our information and each other, which should be the motive for any kind of technology, right? That we get supplies and resources to who needs them when they need them in a way that is respectful, that I think that it's everybody's job to want to know more, to ask questions, to make sure that the people that are making decisions about funding, about hiring, that they're taking into account the needs of not just their organization, but the ways that that role could then serve as an amplifier to support and continue to develop that community awareness piece. I think that it requires all of us to be evangelists, not in any kind of way that is dogma related, but just awareness. Are you okay? Do you have what you need? When there's new information, how are you going about processing that new information, right? After the pandemic, one of the things that I've observed, and I've read scholars who have written about this, is really just the information overload and the fatigue that the average person was feeling whenever they would turn on the news, right? We're about to start an election cycle here in the US. I think that it's important that we take care of ourselves, that we hydrate, that we make sure that we're getting the adequate amount of sleep, that we're accessing food that is nutritious and dense, because whatever you put into your body, it's the same analogy of that AI large language model. If you're putting in bad data, you're going to get bad stuff out of it. If you're putting bad stuff into your body, then it's not going to operate at 100%. Find your higher purpose wherever it is. Take care of your people. Educate yourself on the risks now and the ones that are in the future. There are wonderful resources available at the National Institute of Cybersecurity Education at the NICE. Microsoft has an executive report that is public that shows information of the types of threats given their vantage point. Recommend that if you haven't ever seen that report, that you go out and look for something so that you can see the perspective from somebody else's vantage point. And I think that it requires all of us to be citizen scientists, to be curious, to be cautious, and to continue to be informed and to ask questions. And I think that it is important for us to remember that human element of care. One way to begin to plant seeds now for the future is to be compassionate with ourselves, to remember that the ways that you find joy might be different than the ways that I find joy, and that's okay. But if I love you, I'm going to want you to be happy. And I'm going to want to see you spending time in things that you love. So as we think about neurodiversity, as we think about people that might love differently than we do, or that might not be interested in having children, or people that have 20 children, or 10, or 5, right? Whatever the flavor of your family, right? You belong in that part of the equation. If you're a human and you're here, I think that we have a responsibility to be good neighbors to each other. I don't know where we begin, but I grew up watching Mr. Rogers. So I like to think that I would be the Dr. Rogers of the cybersecurity era. And he had a really good recipe. He got very little fun to create intentional programming, and he broadcasted it. And there's a lot of people that learned very positive messages about what it means to be a good neighbor because they saw him. So I maybe we should bring something like that back and add a cyber twist to it.
Taking care of yourself and just spreading love and kindness. I love that message. My last question is always around learning. And I think we can say that the majority of our conversation today has been about learning, having that radical curiosity. So, what book are you currently reading right now, or you recently read that that you want to share?
That is a terrible question to ask me because I always have more than one book that I'm reading. And they're usually in various stages of my relationships with them, right? So right now, Hungry Bear Goes Fishing. Is that the Fancy Bear, the one that you recommended? That is the one that is in my hands. And as I'm preparing for a talk that I'm going to give Friday, I've been seeking inspiration from that as well as from academic materials. Those are the two that I think about because, again, I think in order for us to know how to be a good elder, a good senior, a good entrepreneur, a good cybersecurity community person, we have to see role models do it. Eric is doing it, and we're finding our own ways to contribute to the community that we're a part of by identity, but also by choice and by profession.
Well, Ivette, I appreciate you sharing your insights, your expertise, and your current books that you're reading. And just a side note, I'm in like 6 different books as well, and definitely understand the challenges to keep up with our favorite books and
Yeah.
what we want to learn and consume.
Oh, I am part of, I'll give a shout out on LinkedIn. I
Mhm.
follow a Dr. Katie Sheck, a
Mhm.
public health professional. And so she started a public health book club. And so we're about to start reading there the Turnaway study. Just look up Public Health Book Club. Public health is everything. The takeaway that I want to leave folks with is remember that everybody's got a lot on their plate and that we don't know what's on their plate or what cutlery they might have to eat it with. So let's try to be kind and share when we can.
Yeah, I love that message. Again, Ivette, I appreciate your time and we will talk later. Have a good
All
one.
right.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.